Hey everyone, Seth at Hub City Vintage, and this week I thought we'd take a closer look at one of my favorite 6138 models and discuss one aspect you might want to consider before finding one of your own. But first, let's just talk about this absolute stunner and get into some of the details. By the numbers, this 6138 3000 is from April of 1972, as you can see from the serial number, and of course houses the B variant of Seiko's Cal 6138. It's a 30-minute, 12-hour day-date chronograph that was in production from about 1971 to 1979 across technically 3 different variations. The earlier A followed shortly after by this B variant. I'm going to discuss the other 6138 variant in a bonus video just for our Patreon supporters right after this one, as it just so happens to specifically relate to the reference that we're talking about today. So what about this one warrants its own video? To start, this one belongs to a client and arrived for servicing and a few minor repairs. It's such an exceptional example though, it was the perfect opportunity to tell you just what I like about the design. Its nickname, the Jumbo, makes sense as it's a whopping 42.3 millimeters across and it has a height of just under 16 millimeters. It is a standout on the wrist, and there's no missing it from across the room. If you count the chapter, the dial actually has 4 separate layers and a beautifully balanced black and white layout. Many say it resembles Omega's venerable Speedy Pro, and I guess I can't completely disagree, but I certainly think this watch stands on its own merits, and side by side with the Speedy Pro is something altogether much less tool and way more sophisticated casual. For me, it's absolutely timeless. If Seiko or any other brand dropped this exact watch onto the open market today, it wouldn't look any more out of place than it did back in 1972. The lines and the layout are absolutely classic. The case shape is a subtle tonneau with mixed finishes and clever detailing, and the touch of yellow through the chrono hands steps up the aesthetic just the right amount. As I mentioned, the dial appears as 4 separate components, starting with the chapter in matte black with subdued hour marker plots. From there, we move down to the raised hour and minute track with long white hashes, and then down to the mid dial with minimal text and a polished Seiko badge. And lastly, a slight beveled edge drops down to the chronograph registers. The hour and minute hands are long batons in black and white, and I love when Seiko uses these hands over a black dial as it makes them appear to just float just above the dial. On top is a 36.5 millimeter beveled hardlex with a polished bezel, and from above there's just tremendous depth. The crystal is an important feature of this reference and a big part of why I wanted to do this video. There are 5 separate style numbers for this model and 2 different crystal assemblies across them. There's the 3000 like this one, along with the 3009, exact same watch just sold in 2 different markets. And they used the 365 V02 GNS0 crystal assembly. The 3002, 3, and 5, yes there is a 3, used the 365 V06 GN00. Why does that matter? Well, availability for one, and by association, expense. So what's the difference? I've got an example of a 3000 and 3009 case here and the 235 case here on the left. So the 3000 and 3009's V02 is a one-piece assembly with the bezel built onto the assembly, like this. As you can see here, the crystal is housed inside of the bezel. And of course, here would go, I've got one here, just a piece of one. There's this would obviously be whole. There's like a clear plastic gasket that fits around the outside of the crystal like that. And then this is pressure set over top of the chapter ring into the case. And that's how it's held in place. The drawback for this style is that there isn't any way to remove just the glass for replacement. And believe me, I have tried. So if the crystal becomes overly scratched like this one and you want a fresh appearance, sourcing a NOS replacement is the only way that I'm aware of it can be done. The 3002, 3, and 5, which use the V06 style, is quite a bit different. The crystal sits in a frame. Now this is actually a 33.5 millimeter, like from a baby jumbo or the Seiko quote-unquote Speedy, as some refer to it. I didn't happen to have a 36.5 example to show you, but this is exactly the same setup. The crystal still sits in a frame, but the frame is separate from the bezel. The crystal and frame are seated into an L-shaped gasket like this one, pretty standard for most of the 6138 and 39 models. And once that crystal assembly is seated, then the bezel is pressed over top and fitted onto the case. Here, the crystal is epoxied into the frame, but it can be removed. This one was already removed. I typically use heat to soften the epoxy and then push the crystal out and remove any excess epoxy from the channel in the frame, this channel here. It's important to use something like pegwood to do that, as it's pretty easy to scratch that polished surface of the channel, and any marring will most likely be visible through the crystal. For that VO6 style, there are several reproduction crystals available to use as a replacement, and they're pretty reasonably priced. As usual, we recommend Aaron's over at Seikosis.com. New old stock examples of these VO2s can start at over $100, and I think there's one on eBay right now as of the recording of this video that's priced at almost $500. A little high in my humble opinion, but they are certainly becoming more scarce by the day. Regardless, don't let a great example of either get by if you're hunting though. I've had great results with polishing both styles using several different grits of polishing sandpaper and cerium oxide in an effort to salvage original crystals. This typically works best when the blemishes aren't too deep and if there's no significant abrasion along the corner. It's a time-consuming process, however, and I do charge by the hour. Before we wrap up, I have to say, as much as I love the single register 6139s, I'm happy to admit the advantages built into the 38 are certainly worth mentioning. One, it can be hand wound at the crown. Of course, it adds this creeping 12-hour register. The minute register with each revolution of the seconds totaler will tick over once, but that 12-hour register is indirectly driven by the upper arbor of the mainspring and is actually in motion all of the time if the chronograph is engaged. And of course, the day and date can be independently quickset via the crown and the second position, unlike the crown press quickset on the 6139, which sets both the day and the date. Here with the crown and 2, we can counterclockwise set the day, English and Italian here, and of course clockwise will advance the date. The Jumbo is truly a timeless timepiece and one that is always at the top of our list. So, patrons, I'll see you shortly for a bit more about the other 6138 variant and how it relates to the Jumbo. Otherwise, I hope this was helpful to those of you who have this reference on your own wish list. If you liked this video, give us a thumbs up below. It really helps. You can help even more by becoming a subscriber, and the helpiest of you can join us over at Patreon, where $7 a month gets you access to exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, comprehensive rundowns of all of our upcoming inventory, and more. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.